What is snapping hip syndrome and how do we fix it? In today's video, we're going to do just that. We're going to go through the different types of snapping hip syndrome, as well as give you 1 to 2 exercises that you're definitely going to want to stick around for. So without further ado, let's dive right into the video. Snapping hip syndrome can happen in a couple different ways. We can have it happen on the outside of the hip as well as inside the hip. Typically we see for snapping hip syndrome, when it occurs on the outside, it's referring more to the IT band snapping over the top of the femoral head. So if you have this snapping sensation on the outside of the hip, but there's no pain, it's not necessarily a bad thing or something's going on. The body makes all kinds of weird noises all the time. But I will say from personal experience, it can be annoying when you're feeling that sensation. Now, if you're in pain, that may be a sign that there is some sort of inflammation in the area, or you have some guarding, something else might be going on, in which you definitely want to try these exercises out or speak to a professional. Now, the other type of snapping hip syndrome is coming from the inside of the joint right about here. Many people believe that this is due to the hip itself catching on, say, a labrum or some sort of connective tissue inside the hip. The same thing goes for the inside of the hip as it did the outside of the hip. Different types of pain can occur because maybe some inflammation or something got kind of jammed up, pinched, and your body is reacting to that. And it's warning you to say, hey, take notice, take heed, fix this, or don't do whatever you just did, whether that's a squat or some other type of activity that you're experiencing. Now, when we get to the root cause of what is actually potentially happening with this snapping sensation and potential pain, we need to look at the hip and its ability to create internal rotation. So if you have a hip in which you're getting snapping on the outside of the hip, you may have a system which is biased over top of that direction. That then is going to put the IT band on more of a stretch and put it in a position where it has more of a likelihood to snap on top of that femoral head. This typically means that you are biased into internal rotation on that side, and for whatever reason, that IT band just makes that clunky noise. Now, the other aspect is the inside of the hip. So if you have the same thing happening, again, you can have this lateral shift of the pelvis, and now you're in too much of an internally rotated position at the hip. If you have too much internal rotation, then you're probably gonna be lacking that internal rotation. Think you can't go where you already are. I'm in my office, so I can't go into my office anymore. If you're already internally rotated, you can't internally rotate anymore. So you could be biased, say laterally shifted over this direction, and that's also gonna cause some clunking or some weird sort of things happening here. You may also have like an anterior tilt sort of thing on that side, or the acetabulum or the inner portion of the femur right here. It's just biased into this position, and then it just kind of catches on random things, a labrum, connective tissue, whatever the heck it is. So the best thing to do is to gain more internal rotation. I step out of my office so that way I can come back into my office. So let's jump into the 2 exercises that are now going to help you restore that movement at the hip and hopefully reduce some of that snapping. Okay, so I decided to come outside because it's a nice day and I don't have a ton of space inside. But we are going to try a couple of the exercises out here. I'm gonna be using a mat. You're not really gonna need any equipment except for potentially a wall and a mat if you're outside on hard gravel. So the first exercise we're gonna do is a pigeon stretch, but it's a little bit of a twist on the exercise in order to get the outside of the hip to open up a little bit. First thing we'll do is assume a pigeon position. So I'm going to take my leg, put it here. Now, if you notice, I'm not gonna have this leg like all the way up at like a 90-degree angle. What I wanna do is just keep it down nice and close to my body. I'm simply just gonna come down to the elbows. So my goal isn't to drop this hip to the floor. I wanna keep it up a little bit, but I'm gonna shift laterally to the other side. Probably best, say if you're shifting to the right and you're going over like we discussed earlier, you probably wanna do this on the opposite side first and then do it on the affected side. So I'm here, and then I'm going to shift laterally over that side. You're gonna feel a really nice stretch through the back hip capsule here. It should be like on the back side of the hip bone, maybe potentially like kind of SI joint area. So I just hold here and I relax. So now the next exercise, you're gonna be doing a sideline position, and you're going to want some sort of wall to put your feet against. Now I'm gonna show you from the side view as well as a superior view or from the top of the head. That way you guys can get a couple different angles and how to perform this exercise. So I'm just gonna assume the position on my side, and I'm going to get into this sort of quarter squat position. It's kind of like I'm at a 45-degree angle. Might be able to come up a little bit higher. My feet and my knees are stacked over top of each other. So you don't want to be like out here where your knees are straight, they're too bent back. Everything's in alignment. Now, in this position, I'm going to work on pushing my bottom leg, the bottom heel
of this foot here into the wall. That's gonna be like a stick in the mud. It's gotta stay put. Once I have that in position, feel some glute on that bottom side. Now I'm gonna take this top foot, place it out in front of the bottom foot here. Straightens out the knee. Now my feet are in alignment. I'm then going to work on taking this knee forward over my toes. I like to put my hand on this hip, and what that does, you'll see how it kind of rocks my body forward. I think my zipper line turns down to the floor. So I reach that knee forward. I'm gonna feel some outside glute on the top side. I'm gonna feel some groin adductor muscles on the bottom leg. Now, if you're doing this really well, if you're lucky, you're gonna feel some stretch on the bottom side hip around where we got that stretch from the pigeon pose that we did earlier. Once you find this position, all you're gonna do is just relax. Make sure your whole body's not rolling forward. So you can kind of push your rib cage backwards while your knee and your hip stays forward. Feel that groin, feel that glute, kind of pressing your feet into the wall. You're going to fully exhale. Feel some abdominals turn on, hold for 5 seconds at the end of that exhale, and then a gentle silent inhale through the nose, breathing into the rib cage, not breathing into the belly.
Now we'll show this to you one more time from the superior view or from the top of the head. Again, this exercise. So we're gonna come down into that kind of squatty position here. Again, everything should be nice and stacked, shoulders over the hips, knees are stacked. I take that step forward, pressing the bottom foot in, hand on the hip, reach my knee forward, hold that position, feel my groin kicking in. I feel a little bit of a stretch in my back as well as into my hip. And I'm just gonna do my 5 breaths. So I exhale everything out, pause, slow silent inhale. One big mistake you'll see people make with this exercise. So they get to this position and they try to arch their back. If you arch your back in this position, you're not gonna feel the hips moving at all. It's not gonna be very fun. You're just gonna be like, why am I doing this? Press the feet in, keep everything neutral, let the pelvis move in a transverse plane and rotation. Don't let things fall out and forward into extension as you do this movement. So now that you've gotten to explore my backyard with me a little bit and do some of these exercises, we want to do a little bit of a retest. So do some of those provoking things that may cause either the snapping hip syndrome or a little bit of that discomfort that you have either on the inside or the outside of the hip. Now, again, if you are dealing with any sort of snapping hip syndrome, you probably are dealing with hip internal rotation issues. So I highly suggest checking out this video right here, which will help you out with internal rotation as well as hip heights and lateral pelvic tilt.